The American Medical Association had its annual meeting this past week in Chicago. During their meeting of delegates, they touted their self-proclaimed accomplishments and the fact that they had been growing in numbers, membership numbers, in the past 2 years. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is what the AMA has to say about its own membership numbers. They write in published accounts that membership has been growing steadily over the last 3 years. But then they cleverly bury the part about the revenue membership and how it has decreased every year for the last 5 years because the new members are actually mostly group practices, students, residents, fellows in training, retirees, and so-called sponsored memberships. These all have a much lower average membership rate, but they boost the numbers. Retirees, students, and residents are a large proportion of this so-called growth, not the practicing doctors that the AMA claims to represent. According to publicly available records, it appears that the AMA has also spent more money each year in the last several years on marketing efforts that are focused on member retention. Look at your Facebook stream. It's all over the place. So the bottom line is that the AMA is spinning the overall increase in membership, but the organization really fails to mention how many are actually practicing physicians who are interacting with patients every day. I expect that in reality, they are likely losing more and more members each year. Remember, the important rule from freshman statistics, at least where I went to school, was when you analyze data and you look at a database, garbage in equals garbage out. And as one of my mentors at Duke the Duke Clinical Research Institute once said, if you torture the data long enough, it will confess to just about anything. And the AMA plays on that exact rule. So let's break it down further and take a closer look at the AMA's membership numbers. There are roughly 1.3 million physicians, medical students, residents, fellows in training in the U.S. today. There are about 250,000 AMA members. According to the AMA's own numbers, 22.5% of the AMA members are students, about 24% are residents. This number was, in 2016, was about 235,000, or roughly 1/6 of America's practicing physicians. Yet students only make up 8.1% and residents 10.4% of the U.S. And if you remove them from the AMA's published numbers, you get about 1 million physicians. And then if you remove the percent of students and residents from the previous numbers that the AMA provided and I just quoted for you, ultimately, there are only about 132,000 practicing physicians who are dues-paying members of the AMA. That's 12%. That drop, a decline that has continued for decades, and it's the AMA's own fault. It's an interesting angle that the AMA paints to picture their membership as a growth in their marketing literature and on Facebook and everywhere else you see it, but they skirt the fact that it's essentially like a fraternity claiming growth by rushing tons of freshmen in the first day that everybody shows up at college, but many of them never become full members that pay dues and support the organization and stay 4 years at college. Beyond the membership spend, what is it about the AMA that America's doctors detest the most? Well, my list is long. First of all, the AMA touts itself as speaking for all of us, but rarely listens to any of us. They work to fill their own pockets, the bureaucrats, with dollars from big pharma and government. The government contracts are their payday. The AMA tends to have a very narrow-minded political view and works to stifle any dissenting opinions in an effort to continue to align with the very government agencies that line the pockets of the AMA executives with taxpayer money. That's a big sticking point for many of us. The AMA has collaborated with the government to expand completely irrelevant and very unfair payment codes, the most hated CPT and ICD-10 as we all know them, and this has significantly contributed to the disparity in pay for different medical specialties. It's all about what the AMA says and gets paid to say. The AMA has spent more of dues-paying member money than almost any other company on lobbying in the last 2 decades. Think $347 million only second to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Realtors, only two organizations who have spent more. Next, the AMA receives nearly twice as much money from the U.S. government for its coffers than it does from membership dues, and has since the Clinton administration, when the AMA signed on to support price controls for physician services in exchange for Washington leaving it to the AMA to decide how to basically split up the ever-shrinking pot of money due to physicians. And they did that based on their own priorities. Yes, it's all about the self-serving AMA that determines the CPT codes. In 2010 alone, the AMA made $72 million in royalties and credentialing products sold to the U.S. government. So who do you think the AMA represents? Us or the folks that interact with the government? I think it's clear that the AMA is desperate. They're an organization that relies on government payments for its revenue, far more than member numbers. And they line the pockets of its own executives. Membership is declining, even though they don't want to admit it, and the majority of U.S. physicians do not believe that the AMA represents their interest. I certainly do not. And they don't represent the interests of my patients or your patients. Let's call a spade a spade. The AMA is not the Association for U.S. Doctors. It's merely a money-making machine for the few who lead the way for the AMA in Washington, D.C.